Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I'm AA Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today, my guest is Murphy Monroe. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here today.
Yeah, thank you. Why don't you start us off by telling me a little bit about yourself?
All right. So I live in Evanston, Illinois, suburb just outside of Chicago. I'm a parent of two kids, 15 and 21. I've got 2 cats and 2 dogs in the house and a super supportive wife. That's my home situation. I am autistic, importantly, for this show and for what we want to talk about, and have over time grown to understand myself better, and grown to be able to do a lot of advocacy work within both the autism and disability community in general, particularly in my hometown. Beyond all that, I also am the executive director of a really cool circus school where we teach all forms of circus. And I'm a bit of a psychonaut. I'm really interested in floating and sensory deprivation, and in fact own a float spa because it's such a passion of mine. And so I'm a whole bunch of different things. But autism is the thing that is most me, and
Sure.
the thing that in many ways I often most want to talk about.
Awesome. What is a float spa? I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, so flotation therapy is a form of sensory deprivation. And so imagine now 10 inches of water. That water is heated to 95 degrees, which is your body temperature. And then inside that 10 inches of water, we're going to add 1,250 pounds of magnesium sulfate or Epsom salt. Okay. That's going to create a 30% salt saturation in that water and make it completely buoyant, as if it were the Dead Sea. Then we ask you to lie on top of that water with your ears pulled just below the surface. And then we heat the air above the water to the same temperature as the water and the same temperature as your body. Then we eliminate all sound. We eliminate all light. And you are in an environment where your brain is not able to track where the air ends and the water begins. You are simply floating on top of water with a true sensation of floating. Wow. And people do this for a lot of different reasons. I do it for the sensory-free environment. I do it because it's just an unbelievable place of relief for me.
Sure.
And a place of, a place to meditate or not, but it's really just a place for me to experience nothingness and to not have all of the strain and stress on my body and mind and eyes and all of it.
So how did you come across that?
All right. Yeah. So one of the first float spas was in Chicago. It opened up in the 90s or maybe late 80s. And so I floated there as a young person, became interested in it, had that always back in my mind as something I remembered. But the truth is that growing up, one of my very favorite places to be was in like the back of a closet with the door closed, like behind all of the clothes, as far back as I could, as dark as I could, or in between my mattress and box springs. So I'm being, like hidden and kind of put away in a sense.
Right.
And there's always this just desire I've had to be in that sort of space, to have time that I can just sort of be me, that I can just rise above myself and start to see the ways my mind and body connect, or the ways my mind and body don't connect.
Right.
and start to form a different kind of relationship between my body and my mind. So one of a whole lot of things that autistic folk have in common, but one of them is a lack of interoception. And interoception is our body talking to us. It's our own interoception that tells us that we're hungry, or tells us that we're cold, or tells us that we're getting sick, or that we have to go to the bathroom.
Sure.
And it's pretty common for people on the autism spectrum to have poor interoception, and boy, do I. It's been a real challenge for me, and all sorts of hurdles it causes. But it's really was inside the float tank, in an environment where everything was still and there was no sensory things coming at me in any way that allowed me to kind of rise above myself and acknowledge my busy left brain, and acknowledge who I am, and start to think about my body as a whole, and start to see if I can't in some ways change that relationship a little bit, strengthen that inner voice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That was kind of a rabbit trail, but that was very interesting. I never heard of it, so yeah, thank you for explaining it.
Absolutely.
What is your definition of inclusion?
So my definition of inclusion is when you walk into a space, whatever this space is, I don't care, a classroom, a post office, whatever, it doesn't matter. When you walk into a space, upon entering, you immediately feel a sense that you have the potential to belong there. That to me is what inclusion is. When someone arrives somewhere, and upon getting there, they feel the potential that they could belong in that space, that they could belong in that group. And when we have inclusive situations, when we have inclusive environments, that's what happens. Right. People walk in, no matter who they are, no matter how they got there, no matter what abilities they came with, no matter the color of their skin, they just walk in and have a sense of, hey, I think I could fit in here. I think I would be accepted here. I think I have the potential to belong here. And to me, that's what inclusion is it's giving everybody a sense that they have the potential to belong there.
Yeah, that's a great definition, the potential to belong. I love that.
Not everyone will belong, but everyone feel they have a chance, that their voice is welcomed there. And that things haven't been set up in such a way that they can't even get in, or they can't stand the environment once they're in it, or whatever the situation may be.
Yeah. So if you walk in, let's say you're walking into a space you've never been in before, and you feel like you have the potential to belong there, like what would be like one thing that you maybe would recognize?
So for me, well, for me, I really have sensory overload and real big sensory issues. And so, if I walk into a space and it has incredibly bright overhead lighting, or if I walk into a space and there's really loud music,
sure,
that's a space that I'm not going to be able to stay in, and I'm not going to be able to think in or process information in. And so, and I know that every space can't be curated to my needs, but I have a lot of things to say, and there's a fair amount of spaces that I should be included in. But in order for me to be there, I have to be able to think in the space. I have to be able to see. I have to be able to hear. And it becomes really hard for autistic people who experience, sensory overwhelm in a way that's just hard to describe or even talk about. The biggest problem for me, or the biggest struggle for me, is light, the sun, the light has the power to incapacitate me. I can take in so much sensory, so much overwhelm, that I lose the ability to process it. And as a result, I lose the ability to process.
Sure.
So, I can be a grown man at my own kid's, Little League game. And because I can't find any shade, I find myself unable to see anymore, unable to verbalize or to make words, and sometimes even unable to move. I literally will get paralyzed from the overwhelm that happens. Sometimes because the pain is so awful, but most often because I've just had resources stripped back and away from me. And so, if I want to be at Little League games, there's got to be a spot of shade.
Right.
And of course there isn't in so many cases.
Right. So do you have like one of those awnings, or do you have like stuff you bring with you then in case there isn't shade to
Yeah, so I have a
you
lot
to
of
be there?
hacks. Yeah.
Okay.
In the car, the windows are obviously,
Right.
tinted, and in our house, everything is tinted and lit the way that's going to feel best to me.
Right.
I have both goggles and, really good prescription sunglasses I'm wearing all of the time. I'm always wearing a hat.
Yep.
I am using, my wife is a helper. She's always helping me find the best piece of shade. You'd think
Right.
I would be an expert in finding shade, but I'm not, because I
Okay.
can't even just looking at the sun to find the shade it's overwhelming.
Okay.
And so having someone help me figure out where to be
Yep.
is really important. And then putting limits on myself, maybe an hour, maybe 3 innings or whatever I decide to do. And maybe it's an important game and I'll do the whole thing, and that's fine. I just know I'm sacrificing the next
Yep.
day.
Yep.
And that's okay. Yes, sometimes that's an easy sacrifice as a parent. But sometimes it's a sacrifice you can't make when the next day has some, urgent business thing, or whatever
Sure.
the case may be. Yeah.
So how was it growing up for you, like in school? Did you have like an IEP and stuff, or did you?
I did not have an IEP growing up, and I think
Okay.
I'm older than. I imagine there wasn't a lot of IEPs happening at my school growing up.
Okay.
I grew up in kind of an unusual situation. My father was the superintendent of the schools locally.
Okay.
And that meant that I had both a sense responsibility of being smart and a good student, which I
Sure.
was not.
Yeah.
And also I had the advantage of having teachers and principals who didn't want me to get in trouble. And wanted me to do well in their classes, and were often willing to help me. But school was incredibly hard for me. Sitting still is not possible for me as a kid. Still really, really difficult for me. Being able to sit still and listen it's just not possible. It's just not something I could do then. I still have deep struggle with reading comprehension.
Okay.
And so as a young person, reading comprehension was just a major, major struggle for me all of the time. I felt like I couldn't read. And now, my reading comprehension only comes when it's read to me, not when I'm reading it to myself.
Okay.
And so I did poorly in school, all the way up and into high school and through high school. And I did a lot of trying to make excuses. And, so I think maybe something worth saying is, from very early as I can remember, I knew that I was different in a significant way. I knew that I thought differently than everyone else in my family. I knew I had different kinds of ideas in my head. I knew that I was experiencing things differently than everybody else was. I knew that they all had a kind of relationship together, even everyone in my family that I just wasn't really part of, didn't know how to be part of, in spite of super loving, great, progressive family. I knew there was something in my mind wrong with me, something perhaps really wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was scared of it. I was scared of anybody finding out about that. I was scared of what it meant for my future. I was scared of institutionalization. I was scared of special ed. I wanted, and I was scared of my family of educators not thinking that I had smarts. And so I did a lot of pretending, a lot of trying to get away with not being able to do things, and a lot of making excuses, and a lot of hiding, and a lot of trying to become sort of friends or person to person with teachers in order to see if I couldn't develop some kind of relationship that would let them see that,
Right.
like, I am smart. I am something. I really, really am. I can't operate here, and I can't do these things you're asking me to do. I can't.
Right.
And I got through high school at a really good competitive high school and graduated the very, very bottom of my class, and was able to go to college as a theater student, and started to do better and better academically in college, but still quite a struggle. And then went on to earn a master's degree, which took me a good 5 years. A program that everybody else who was in finished in 2 years took me 5. And the patience of teachers who are willing to let me figure out how I could get all of the learning and get all of the work done, but do it in such a way that met my systematic needs.
Sure.
And so school's been hard for me, and never really something that's been a positive in my life. I work in schools. I worked for a college in higher ed for quite a while,
Okay.
and I now run a school of sorts. And
Yep.
so I'm really interested in education. I
Yeah.
have a real hard time with the expectations set up in our schools. Really uncomfortable with how special ed exists in our schools, at least most of our schools. Uncomfortable with the term we use for it at all.
Yeah.
That's not the advocacy work that I do specifically, but I think it's incredibly important that we continue to break through to teachers, and break through to school systems, and break through to folks to understand that there is a whole group of students in that classroom who are disabled in a different way than you realize, and can be helped in ways that are simpler than you may know, and powerful,
Right.
but involve breaking through things, and it's tricky.
Yeah, for sure. What was it like to be diagnosed as autistic as an adult, and how did it change the way you view your past experiences and approach your future?
Yeah. So I've been told I was autistic as a young person by a therapist. I was told I was Asperger's as a young person.
Yeah.
Asperger's is no longer in the DSM and not something that we talk about. But as a young person, that's what I was told I had.
Yep.
And I didn't think a whole lot about it. I then read Temple Grandin's work early on in college, or I listened to Temple Grandin's Life in Pictures, and I just couldn't read that and not think of myself as her. I've just never associated with something quite so much up until that point. And so I think in my mind, I think I knew I was autistic, or had a clear idea that I was autistic, but it's not something that I processed. It's not something that I owned. It's something that I continued to keep a secret, partly for professional reasons. I worked in higher ed administration for quite a while and had a senior job, and I worked for a ed tech company in a very corporate role, and I wanted to fool everybody. I wanted to, make everybody think that I wasn't autistic. I don't know that I did fool anybody, but I sure thought I was.
Right.
And then raising kids early on. I wasn't sure I wanted my kids to know that I was autistic, or my kids' friends' parents, or it just felt fraught to me.
Mm-hmm.
So as an adult, really only several years ago now, I went in to have myself officially diagnosed. And I did it really for myself. And I went through a long process, several weeks long process, and it's silly expensive. And it's so unfortunate that that's, it's how it happens in our country, is you can afford it or not.
Right.
And so, when I got a very clear diagnosis, and what that diagnosis did to me was just a gigantic wash of relief. it allowed me to just say to myself, like, damn, if you are autistic, and these things have these things are caused by autism. That there's so many things about me that narratives I've created about myself, or narratives that other people have created about me, or labels that people put on us, as too loud, too forceful, too direct, too moving way too much, speaking too precisely, and a whole world of things that are ways that I operate that feel uncomfortable to people. And as I've begun to understand those things, I've just decided to own these things, to talk about it, share it openly with my family. The job I currently have, I interviewed for, as here I am. I'm autistic and I want to lead your school.
Sure.
And it's made a huge difference for me. It's now allows me to get the help I need. It allows me to ask for the kind of help I need. It allows me to advocate for things I need. And it also has helped me to meter myself, to start to really take more control over my life. What I eat, how much time I spend outside, how much loud noise I'm around, whether or not I watch media that has moments of peril in it or not, all sorts of choices that I can make in order to make my resources take me another hour that day, or get me
Great.
a little bit further. And as I've talked about it more, I've just found myself reaching so many people, and making a difference for all sorts of people. And then, as you know, better than me, I'm sure, as you do disability work, you hear more and more stories of people who don't tell their stories often because they're just haven't been listened to. And the more that these stories get uncovered, the more passionate you become, and the more it becomes just so self-evident that there are just so many people that we are leaving behind, that we are excluding, that we are not creating the same opportunities for in even the most basic ways that we do elsewhere. And so all of those types of things for me have grown out of, just me accepting autism, and me, being willing to live in it. And so that the primary occupation of most autistic people is pretending not to be autistic. That's what most autistic people are doing all of the time, as actively as they can. No doubt I'm unintentionally doing it right now as I count eye contact with the screen, or I pay attention to how much I'm shaking. And that's what autistic people do, is they pretend not to be autistic. And so I guess the diagnosis for me gave me permission to stop pretending. And that's I think the biggest difference is I just stopped pretending to be something that I wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it does really resonate with me what you talked about, like sharing the story piece, because just in the short time I've been doing the podcast, I've had numbers of people saying just because they saw me sharing my story, that it made it okay for them to share their stories. So there is power in telling stories and sharing them. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the stories of caretakers are every bit need to be heard every bit as much, because there is just a world of understanding that exists amongst disabled community and caretakers that needs to get out more and more.
For sure. How has your neurodivergence contributed to your success as a parent, leader, advocate, and entrepreneur?
Well, it's been really useful in all sorts of ways. So as a work person and entrepreneur, it's been incredibly useful. I got into college admissions at a young age, and I was at a college here in Chicago, a big arts college, and I worked in the admissions office. And within only a few months of being there, I had memorized every statistic there was to know about the college and its demographics and its financials. And then I went on to start learning the facts about every high school that sent their kids to the college and what those high schools were like and how many kids they sent to us and what race those kids were and whether or not those kids stayed. And I just like got obsessed with this information. And once I hear something or learn something, it's often hard for me to let go of it. And so, and that combined with me having a brain for numbers that is not always good, not always welcome, but I can do a lot of fast calculations under certain circumstances. And so, you know, as a young person in a workspace, when you're sitting at the table and you're the person who both seems to know the most about the topic, seems to have the most confidence and authority, and the one who's able to, you know, crunch numbers and come up with, you know, comparable statistics for people on the spot, all of a sudden you're endowed with all sorts of other skills and features that you may or may not actually have.
Right.
And so much of my success work-wise has just come from my ability to learn intensely about information, crunch it, share it out, think it through, and hold it in my head. As a parent, well, as a parent, how it's helped me, you know, autism is hereditary, neurodivergence is hereditary as far as we understand. I don't know that either of my kids are autistic. I don't think so. But of course, they have neurological differences and sensitivities, as all sorts of people do. And certainly having been aware of those and having been sort of sensitive to some basic needs that could just be handled easily and that I could be aware of and help with, certainly made a big difference, the kids in lots of ways. But then I think also I have a directness about me that maybe in a business setting isn't ideal, but in a personal, familial setting, maybe is really reassuring and feels really good that I'm the one on your side, and that we're doing this together. And I think I've had there's also a vulnerability to being this way with your kids that I think adds into a relationship. You know, between anyone disabled and people around them that they're being honest to, and they're really sharing their experience with, it develops a whole different kind of inside relationship between them. I don't need to tell you. And so I think that's also been a part of my better part of my parenting, which of course isn't all perfect.
No, parenting, not, there's some good stuff, some bad stuff. Hopefully more good than bad.
That's right.
As a city commissioner for disabilities, what are some of the most impactful changes you've been a part of, and how can others advocate for accessibility in their own communities? Yeah,
awesome. So in the city of Evanston, where I live, it's a town of about 75,000 people.
Okay.
We have a commission on aging and disabilities that, besides overseeing like the long-term care facilities and that type of thing in the city, it oversees the city's work towards meeting all of the requirements of the American with Disabilities Act, which both my city and every other city in the country still completely fall behind on some 30 years later.
Right.
And so we serve as an advocacy group who helps propose changes to city law and advocates for changes both within businesses in the city, changes within city code, and also works to hold the city's feet to the fire to meet their obligations to the disabled community, and does the work that we were talking about a minute ago of bringing as many people forward so that the legislators and decision makers can really understand that this is a huge part of our community. And you know, we shouldn't be saying no to them.
So how did you
go ahead.
How did you get into
sidewalks?
Yeah, sidewalks. How did you get into that position?
I just became aware of, I became frustrated in the city of lack of progress in several areas. I started doing research into the city's ADA, how the city manages the ADA within itself. And I just got interested. And it's one of those things I just started, couldn't not learn and couldn't stop learning and couldn't stop getting more information about. And at that point, it just seemed like this is where I'm being led. Yeah, I was going to say sidewalks is if you talk to probably any community anywhere, but you talk to folks, certainly in my community, we survey, and number one with by a mile is sidewalks, is being able to simply get mobility devices on and off a curb cut, be able to board on and off buses, to be able to get to the pharmacy down the street, to be able to get on the train, all these like super, super basic things that don't exist in cities still. I mean, we have just cracked sidewalks everywhere. In our city, they're largely cracked because of trees. And the folks in our city are generally much more interested in saving the trees than having completely flat sidewalks for their disabled neighbors to move on. And so moving forward the ball on sidewalk repair, it's been, not particularly exciting necessarily, but like a really big deal. Because, just down the street from me right now, there's a really lovely apartment building that's all apartments designed for disabled folks. They've got maybe 40, 50 people living in there. And just 3 blocks from that is a Walgreens. And they all have to drive in the street, in their chairs. They're all going in the street to get from their apartment building to Walgreens because there isn't clear curb cuts where there needs to be. And that's absurd. The city knows that there's 40 people in wheelchairs living there. And so that's the type of thing that we're advocating for, and I get easily heated about.
I mean, my daughter uses a wheelchair, so curb cuts and sidewalks that are in disrepair are, super annoying. And to me, it's just like the same thing. The ADA was 30 years ago. It's like, how can we still have corners without curb cuts? It's like, how is that even possible? It's just, it's frustrating because, for us, especially if you go to a different part of town you're not used to walking in, you don't know that there isn't until you get to the end of the street. And then it's crap, we can't get down. And now you either got to backtrack all the way or go down a driveway out into the street. And that's not good either. So it's really frustrating.
Exactly right. Yes. Yeah. And, there's also just kids on bikes and people pushing babies and there's just all sorts of reasons why we ought to have, make mobility possible for human beings.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about? We covered quite a bit of stuff.
No. Well, first of all, I just really appreciate chatting with you, and I've enjoyed listening to your episodes. And I think that the piece I think is most useful, especially to parents of autistic kids, is just understanding that they're that it's important to let them express themselves in the limited ways that they currently can, and to allow as much room for grace as possible, especially in public, and to look for opportunities it's just it gets really tricky for me. There is a sense sometimes of parents of autistic kids who sometimes want to cover up for their kids a little bit, or want to help their kids a little bit extra, or want to hold their kids back a little bit. And I have a feeling that often all of those things have a much bigger impact on the kid than they do on what's actually happening in that moment for everybody. And by that kid feeling the parent's nervousness about maybe what they're going to say next, or what they're going to do next, or feeling that nervousness, not there being space for them to just, be how they're going to be, that can have a big impact on a kid. And it's often important to remember that their perspective at any given moment is just as important as the other people around in the room too.
Absolutely. What is one tip you can share the listeners to help them be more inclusive today? Just something simple they can do starting now to be more inclusive.
Yeah. Talk to everybody. If you're in a room full of people, whatever it is, work, the party, whatever it is, I'm just telling you right now, there are people in that room that are disabled that want to talk about it. There's people who you can tell that are disabled, and maybe they don't want to talk about their disability, but they should be one of the first people you greet, because I guarantee you they're one of the most interesting people there.
Yeah.
And we all just have to find ways to break through discomfort and to get to know each other, so that we can all contribute, and all, feel like we have the potential to belong.
Absolutely. Where can everybody connect with you?
I've got a website, murphymonroe.com, MURPHYMONROE. And you can see about kind of some of the speaking and consulting work I do, and also anybody's welcome to reach out to me for any reason at all.
Awesome. Ready for the last question?
I am ready for the last question.
Do you like Spam? Yes or no?
Well, so I grew up with it in my cabinet for sure. Ate it on a couple of camping trips. Never liked it until I went to Hawaii with my wife. We went to some like local kind of a diner type spot. Had I think it was called Spam Masubi. Was essentially like sushi spam. Over rice with a bit of seaweed, and I would say that's the most I've enjoyed sushi. I don't actually most I've enjoyed spam. Forgive me. Okay. So I'm not willing to say I like spam, but I've enjoyed spam.
Okay. So that's kind of a yes.
That you eat kind of a yes. You can have that as a yes.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so I live in Austin, Minnesota, where they make it and where the Spam Museum's located. So yeah, it's been fun asking all the guests yes or no to see what they say. But I should like keep track of how many times Hawaii comes up in the answer, because it's quite a bit.
Is it quite a bit? Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Maybe they do spam right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty big in Hawaii. My partner, she went there like 3 years ago, and she's like going to Walmart and there's pallets of spam. Like we're in Austin, Minnesota, where they make it, and we don't even have pallets of spam like in the aisles. So
yes,
they like it there.
Whole different thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. A real pleasure. Really appreciate it. Thanks
to all of you To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.